Welcome back to Forbidden Knowledge News. I'm your host, Chris Matthew. Tonight my guest is John Michael Greer, but before I bring him on, just a couple of announcements. First, you can always get new regular episodes free on Rokfin, Odysee, and all podcast platforms. You definitely want to check us out on Rokfin. This is where you get all of our premium shows. You get all of our shows. They come out first here on Rokfin before they go on any other platform. And you can get every amazing show from all the creators there on Rokfin. Get yourself a free account. Check out what they have to offer. Also, check out the new awesome podcast by the Forbidden Knowledge Network: Inception, Raised by Giants, Day Zero, Understanding Propaganda, Dawson Time, and we have more to come. You can get them all in one place, our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, or click that link in the description. And finally, guys, if you're reaching that gray hair stage in life like myself, check out C60 Purple Power, maybe the most powerful antioxidant known to man. My health has been completely turned around since taking that. You can even get C60 for your pets, so your pets can feel just as great as you do. Just click the link in the description and you're going to get 10% off your order plus free shipping. Today I want to welcome back to the show John Michael Greer. He is a widely respected author and blogger in fields ranging from nature spirituality to the future of industrial society. He is the author of more than 70 books, including 16 novels and blogs, weekly at ecosophia.net. John, welcome back. How are you doing today?
Doing very well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be on.
Yes, it's great to have you on. Last time you were on, we discussed a bit about your book, The King in Orange, and went off on a few rabbit holes from there. But today I want to go deeper into nature and history of magical practices, secret societies, and magic being practiced at the highest levels, and how much of an effect does it really have creating our culture and even manifesting aspects of a greater reality that those that practice at these higher levels probably want to manifest? So we got a lot to talk about. I think we have a good time. Let's start today with, what would you say are some of the earliest recorded forms of magic and maybe some examples of those practices?
Okay. One of the problems that we face, of course, is that while there's reason to believe that magic has been practiced as long as human beings have been around, we don't have written records from before about 5000 BC. At that point, where we start seeing written records in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, as soon as that happens, records of magical practice show up. Was there stuff going on before then? Of course. Are there various traces that seem to be remnants of ritual activity of various kinds and so on? Yes. Do we know what they were doing? No. If all you have is the remnants of a ritual and you don't know anything about the culture that created it other than what kind of stone tools they used, you're kind of out of luck. Right. As soon as we hit the ground running with written records in Egypt and Sumeria, though, magic is in full spate. So there's obviously a long history before then. You have Egyptian mages who are doing things like, well, for example, the pharaohs, the kings of Egypt. They would wear their sandals. The sandals that they wore every day had the names and images of their enemies on the bottoms. So they were literally magically trampling down their enemies with every step they took.
Interesting.
Oh yeah. In fact, the way things were set up in Egypt, Egypt was full of magic. People practiced it all the time, and in fact, most of the Egyptian priesthoods practiced magic on their off hours. They had an arrangement whereby you would do, if you were a priest, you do 1 week doing the intensive temple service, the rituals, and all that kind of stuff, and then you'd have the other 3 weeks of the month off. And what you did during those 3 weeks was do magical work for ordinary clients, just the ordinary Egyptian citizens who needed a healing spell for this or a good luck spell for that or what have you. There was a lot of it. And while we only have modest amounts of it from the very early times, it's very clear that all of the basic kinds of magic that we now know about were being practiced at that point. You had people invoking spirits, you had people calling down powers from deities, you had people choosing herbs and stones and things like that that naturally had certain kinds of magical powers in them. You had people watching the timing of the heavens and saying, okay, when this star rises, that's the right time for this. So all this stuff was a going concern. Meanwhile, over in Mesopotamia, over in what's now Iraq, where the Sumerian civilization was thriving at about the same time, we have an enormous amount of material on their magic because they wrote on clay tablets, which they baked in ovens. So you have these basically bricks. Stick one of those in the desert, 5,000 years later, it's perfectly readable. And they had whole libraries of stuff, and a lot of what they stored was information on magic. Here are these evil spirits, and here are 52 different spells you can use to drive them off. And here is a spell for healing, and here's a spell for making people sick, and here's a spell, and of course, astrology. That was the great thing in Mesopotamia. They, for as far back as we know, in fact, probably back before the beginning of recorded history, they had the common sense idea of watching the heavens and comparing what was going on in the heavens to what was going on Earth. That's where modern astrology comes from. Thousands of years of priests noting down on those clay tablets. Okay, Mars rose in Aries. Of course, they used their words for Mars and Aries, but it was the same system. And a war broke out. Okay, Mars is strong in Aries and tends to do da-da-da. Okay, let's see what happened 500 years ago when that happened.
Right.
And so you had a lot of people doing stuff like that. So it was a going concern as far back as we know.
I'm really glad you brought up astrology because the more I look into this and the more guests I have, astrology seems to be a huge driving factor in so many things. I mean, even the Bible, it can be decoded into an astrological book, basically. So I'd like to get your take on how do you think these ancients were able to basically decode the skies and basically apply it to their lives in this magical way and understand how the planetary energies affect everything,
We actually know exactly how they did it because, again, it was these guys in Mesopotamia, and they took notes. Seriously, we have in some of the big Babylonian and Assyrian libraries, we have tens of thousands of tablets that are all like, let's see, what happened, such and such happened in the sky. What happened on Earth? It's literally an empirical science. They didn't start with theories. They started by saying, okay, what happened when this happened? What happened when that happened? The king of our city-state has just had a son who is the crown prince. Here's what the sky looked like when he was born. Let's see what kind of person he grows up into. And you start that about, say, 3200 BC or before, and you keep on doing that year after year, century after century, millennium after millennium. You've got an immense database, and within a few centuries, you're starting to say, okay, this little red moving star, which we now call Mars, that's associated with war, that's associated with violence, with forceful energies, with masculine energies. Here's this other bright one, and which we call Venus. Now that seems to be associated more with emotions, with love, with the feminine energies. Wow. Okay, what happens when they're in different positions with one another? Let's see when they're conjoined, when they're square, when they're trine, and so on. They did it by patience, persistence, bloody-minded stubbornness, and a willingness to keep detailed records. The same way that scientists who are honest do things now. It's just that what they found was something that our modern scientific dogma doesn't allow to exist, and so scientists go, rah, 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 that can't be true.
Yeah.
But in fact, it's an empirical science, and they didn't, as far as certainly from the records we have, they didn't do it using oracles or visions or anything like that. They did it the patient, steady, realistic way of watching the heavens and comparing it to what was happening on the ground.
Yeah, and in modern times, astrology is looked at as so woo-woo and all the, especially even magical practices. But if you look back in ancient times, it seems that it was just a common thing that everyone was practicing magic on some level, and that at some point we snuffed out everything that worked well for us. Astrology, practice of magic, all these things that helped humanity thrive,
And the thing is, this is really recent. This is very, very recent. As recently as, say, 1500, 1600, astrology was all over the place. Magic was, obviously, certain kinds of magic had to be underground because of the Christian church had its little attitude problem with magic. Yeah. But you had all this stuff was all over the place. But at the time of the scientific revolution, People don't realize what a radical change that made. You had these intellectuals who had this vision of the world made completely subject to the human will, the world as a lump of dead matter that we could do whatever we wanted to with. And they pushed that, and because they were able to pull out a few technological rabbits from their hats, people bought into it.
Yeah.
People bought into it in a big way. Now we're starting to discover that there was a downside to that. Now it's becoming very clear that a lot of those technological rabbits they pulled from hats had major downsides. And we're running into those now. And, as far as the astrologers and the mages, well, we're still here. And we'll see what happens. But there is certainly, for the last, 50, 60 years now, there's been very steadily growing interest in magic, in astrology, and all these things. And I think sanity will return.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that too, because I've noticed it's kind of like a rise of Christianity and Abrahamic religions, and now they're kind of falling again, and it seems to be a recent thing. What are your thoughts on what's behind this? What's the driving factor behind this kind of rise and fall of these Abrahamic religions, and then a return of a more magical age?
Yeah, the thing is, history goes through these cycles. History is circular. It is not a straight line. The great lie of our time is what I call the myth of progress, the idea that if we just keep on building bigger and bigger and louder and noisier machines, we will take us to the stars. Well, that's not happening. Deal. It's not happening. I think many, many people now are realizing that it's not going to happen, not in our lifetimes, not in the lifetime of our species. We've burned through most of the Earth's supply of fossil fuels. We don't have, dilithium crystals. Find me one, please. And so on. And so basically, history is a circle. It's a cycle. Actually, it's a whole series of circles. There are little circles and bigger circles and huge circles and gargantuan circles. One of the biggest, if we're to go by the traditional lore of occultism, one of the biggest is a process whereby civilizations get into this particular track of getting into technology, getting into power, getting into trying to run the world, and then that blows up on them and down they go again. Meanwhile, religions are doing the same cycle. Religions have about a 2,000-year cycle. From the time that they are, the white-hot creations of visionary prophets to the point that they're doddering, senile bureaucracies going through the motions, and that's true of Abrahamic religions as much as it is of any other. So we've got several of these cycles that are basically turning down at the same time. We've got the cycle of our series of civilizations, the one that's brought us to the same point that the civilization we dimly remember in the legends of Atlantis reached about 11,000 years ago. And then we know that it went down with rising seas. Does that sound familiar? And so we also have this religious cycle, this 2,160-year religious cycle, key to the zodiacal ages. And that's coming down right now as the religions of the Piscean age sunset out, having reached the point of becoming senile bureaucracies going through the motions. And we have nations are rising and falling. We have cultural movements. All of these things are following circular patterns.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Now, I want to talk a little bit about secret societies. Do you think that when these were formed, the individuals kind of knew that they were going to have to go into a state of hiding because of the climate of the world around them with these rise of Abrahamic religions and Christianity? Basically, they were getting killed, and they wanted to preserve this in some way. Oh, yeah. Is that the way it happened?
The thing to keep in mind is that secret societies, that there have always been and there always will be secret societies anytime that people don't have the option of doing certain things in public. Right. Political secret societies, magical secret societies, sexual secret societies. Talk to an elderly gay man or lesbian sometime about how things were back in the day before you could be openly gay or lesbian. Right. They had passwords. You go into a lesbian bar and you say, "Yeah, I'm looking for a friend of Dorothy," and they all know you're a lesbian.
Right. Yeah.
It was just, yeah, so exactly. It was just like any other secret society because human beings are good at secrecy. That's one of the things we do. And every culture, every society, every age of the world has these. I would like to see more secret societies. In fact, I think one of the things that has kind of gone wrong in modern times is that so many people don't realize that they could get a lot more. They could get a lot more freedom, have a lot more opportunity to pursue their own agendas, their own goals in life, by going underground, organizing these secret organizations, and staying out of sight of the mainstream culture that is not necessarily going to have their best intentions in mind. I think we need more secret societies.
Yeah, I think recently the secret societies that people traditionally think are, malevolent and evil, those have just become the mainstream, corporatocracy that we're seeing all around us.
Yeah,
and
well,
the real secrets are what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. Secret societies are secret societies are a tactic of weakness. Look at any of the really successful secret societies. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Not the ones most people are thinking of. The United States of America was founded by secret societies. Okay,
Yeah.
The Continental Congress, or as it was then, the Committees of Correspondence originally, and the Sons of Liberty were secret societies. They did everything in secret. They had their passwords and all this kind of stuff, and they planned the American Revolution, and they carried it out, and they won. And as soon as they had won, what happened? The Committees of Correspondence became Congress. The Sons of Liberty, we call that the United States Army now.
Yeah.
So, and this is generally what happens. The same thing happened in Germany. In the run-up to 1933, you had this organization called the Thule-Gesellschaft, the Thule Society. And it was a secret society, complete with the passwords and all the rest of the stuff. They organized a political action wing, which they called the German Workers' Party, which recruited a talented young orator named Adolf Hitler. He said, no, you need to change the name to National Socialist German Workers' Party. Why? Because the National makes it sound right-wing and the Socialist makes it sound left-wing, and we'll get people from both sides. He was right. They ran him, they supplied him, they trained him, they financed him, and as soon as the Nazis were in a sufficient position that they didn't need to be secret about anything anymore, the Thule-Gesellschaft shut down. They didn't need to bother being secret anymore. They simply became, many of them, people involved in the Nazi government. Same thing happened in Russia in the run-up to the communist takeover in 1917. What starts out as a secret society drops the secrecy as soon as it conceives power. And so at this point, I mean, you've got organizations like the Council on Foreign Relations, like the Trilateral Commission and so on, which are basically the centers of factions within the ruling class. But the ruling class doesn't have to be secret about anything.
Yeah.
Why should they care? It's not as though they think they have to worry about you and me.
Yeah, exactly.
The secret societies that matter at this point are the ones that are being formed by people outside the centers of power. And of course, we won't know much about them until things start really kicking into gear. But we'll see.
Yeah, I want to talk about what's kind of behind the, I guess you could say, religion or spiritual aspects of some of these secret societies. Maybe we could start with Freemasonry, because there's a lot of misconception. You hear the conspiracies of, that the 33rd degree, they tell you you're worshiping Lucifer and all these different things. And there's just so much BS going around. I'd like to get your thoughts on what's really going on with Freemasonry and the spiritual aspects behind some of those secret societies like that.
Freemasonry started out a very long time ago as a secret society, keeping some very, very important secrets, no question. But we're talking the Middle Ages here. Okay, there's been some very good arguments made that the Freemasons are descended from the old Knights Templar. You'll have heard about them.
Yes.
Those of our listeners who haven't, the short story is that they were an order of warrior monks. Think the Western equivalent of the Shaolin monk. Okay, except they did it with armor and swords. But they ended up falling afoul of the Catholic Church and of the King of France and various other people. Many of them were burnt at the stake. The others went underground. And in Scotland, a bunch of them managed to survive because, the Knights Templar had their own castles, they had their own buildings, they had their own builders. And a bunch of them who were in the building trades basically managed to survive. They went underground. They became masons, stonemasons, people who built things out of rocks. And they preserved certain Templar secrets for the long term. But it was a long time, and there was a lot of ups and downs. I have a book out called The Secret of the Temple, which traces how certain secrets that they had, which ended up getting lost. And in fact, in modern Masonic ritual, I say this because I am a Freemason, among other things, in your modern Masonic ritual, in the Master Mason's degree, one of the major points is the Masons don't have the secrets anymore. The true word of a Master Mason is lost. Nobody knows what it is anymore. And part of what you're doing as a Mason is pledging yourself to try to find it again.
Now, is it true that there are higher levels above the 33 degree, many higher levels?
Well, it depends very much. Higher is a really challenging thing. Your basic structure of Freemasonry is not. It's not a linear hierarchy. It's not that all the third degree Masons are obedient to the fourth degree Masons and so on up. And you've got. I mean, in the United States, you've got 50 different state Grand Lodges who don't take orders from anybody. And you have the York Rite and the Scottish Rite, which are two sets of higher degrees. And some Masons join one, and some Masons join the other, and some join both. And if they were to try to give orders to the Grand Masters of the Masonic Lodges, they'd be in deep kimchi. It's this confused, jumbled, disorganized mess, frankly. And that's one of the things that has made it thrive, because if the Grand Master of one Masonic organization gets really stupid and starts ordering dumb things, it doesn't affect anybody else. So are there levels above the 33? Well, if you happen to belong to the Rite of Memphis and Mizraim, sure, they have 99 degrees of initiation. Almost nobody belongs to it anymore. In this country, the Scottish Rite, which goes up to the 33rd, that's the highest. That's the largest number of degrees that are commonly taken. And in fact, at the 30, I'm not a 33rd degree Mason, but I have read that one of the obligations you take at the 33rd is not to join any organization that claims to have any higher degrees.
Right. Now, there's Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that there seems to be this other huge misconception whenever it's surrounding secret societies and people in power that when we look at I guess politics and people in corporation, that there's this one pyramid that we're at the bottom and they're at the top, but they're all part of this secret organization, like the secret society that rules over the planet. And I'm more of the belief that these people don't know what the hell each other are doing, and it's all about greed and what they want for their personal gain, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. The thing that I've observed watching politics and business, as I do as an astrologer, among other things, is that it's not a single pyramid. You've got these different power centers, these different groups of people who have a lot of money and a lot of power, a lot of influence, and so on, and they're fighting each other. They're at each other's throats. And so you have this faction trying to claw their way past that faction, and this pressure group trying to force its views, while three other pressure groups are fighting against them, and so on. It's a mess. Yeah. And one of the reasons, in fact, that the United States, for example, is in such bad shape these days, is that there's so much stalemate at the upper levels. Nobody can get anything done. Because no matter what you do, you're stepping on someone's toes, and the oil industry isn't going to and the various rich families connected to it, they're going to stop anything you do in that direction. Well, these other rich families over here, you better not try that. And so it's all just frozen up into stalemate, a stalemate of a bunch of rich, increasingly senile old men and women who are sitting on the levers of power and don't know what to do with them anymore, and don't really want to do anything with them other than just stay rich and powerful. And we'll see what happens, but that's not usually something that lasts indefinitely.
Well, do you see a lot of what's happening today in our current society as that kind of last grip on, they want to hold on to as much power as they can because they know it's all falling apart, basically?
I think that's a lot of it. Partly it's a generational thing. Before the baby boomers, previous generations, when they hit 70 or so, they dropped out. When they got into their 60s, they retired. The boomers are clinging to power with a death grip. Partly, I mean, the tragedy of the baby boom generation. I'm speaking of my own generation here, by the way. Um, but the tragedy of the baby boom generation is that it had these glorious ideals, and it proceeded to sell out over and over and over again. And at this point, the 60s were a long time ago, and the boomers have got to be looking back and seeing that they've become everything they hated, everything they thought they were rebelling against. But for them to retire, for them to step down and let other generations shove them aside and take their place, that would be admitting that that their dreams were, they sold their dreams, that they cashed out and walked away from them. I don't think they can stand that. I think they still cling to that fantasy that they are the generation that matters. They are the young, important, even though they're at this point, they're a bunch of senile old farts who haven't had a new idea in 40 years.
Well, it seems like that end, they were also fed a huge line of BS about their own history and existence up until this point,
Oh yeah, and they have maximized that since then, basically rewriting history to make the baby boomers look like a generational messiah. But over and above the baby boom, because you've got that one generation, but you've also got the simple fact that we've pushed this particular kind of industrial society, this kind of way of living, we've pushed it as far as we can go. We're seeing at this point, the bare shelves over in Europe. They're having another round of energy crises. We'll have one here in the near future. We've basically that whole way of trying to live, treating the earth as nothing but resources, nothing but a garbage dump. The whole way of saying we run things, we have the power, we're the technological marvels of the world, and we're going to the stars. It's failed. It's over. Stick a fork in it. It's that well done. And many, many people don't want to admit that. Many people don't want to deal with the fact that and it is a fact, of course, that we need to stop. We need to regroup. We need to look at what kind of lifestyles we can actually support with the renewable resources that are what we're going to have left in the not too distant future. And we need to downshift big time. So that but people won't do that. People are stuck on that myth of progress. They're stuck on that dream of Star Trek future metastasizing across the galaxy or something, even though we know it's not going to happen. Even, it's been 50 years now since space probes came back telling us that outer space is full of hard radiation. And we're not even going to Mars, because you want to set up a colony on Mars. That's great. Write your will before you go, because you'll be dead of radiation poisoning and cancer before you have a chance to get back.
Right.
It really is that serious. And ever since the 70s, ever since the U.S. and the Soviet Union both canceled their space programs because they got that information. The space probes brought this stuff back, and they were going, oops. Well, that's not going to work, is it? So we dropped our moon program, and the Russians simply canceled theirs halfway through before they'd even gotten to the moon. Everyone stopped talking about going to Mars, except the myth, except the vision, the dream, the Star Trek fantasy was so deeply rooted in the minds of the privileged classes, they could not bear the thought that they weren't going to get the Flash Gordon future that they wanted. And so, unfortunately, that doesn't mean they're going to get it. That just means we all have a much rougher future ahead.
Yeah, you're spot on with that. There's a lot of that, though. I mean, the biggest, I guess, form of magic that I can identify in my daily life is actually a weaponized form, and it's on the TV. Every time I turn on the TV, Ding. There it is. Boom. Just brainwashing.
We have a winner. Good for you. Yes. Yeah, that isn't the cheap sorcery of advertising.
Yeah.
The cheap sorcery that convinces you that your happiness, your self-esteem, your value as a person depends on running out and buying some piece of sleazy corporate crap.
Oh, yeah.
That is sorcery. That is, and that's being blasted at you out of the television, off the internet, on
now
the
social
radio,
media,
billboards, everything. Because it started out as a way to try to sell things that people at this point, they're not selling things, they're selling lifestyles. They're selling belief in the system. because the system is cracking. And if enough people turn off the television, turn off the social media, get rid of, drop out of the advertising thing, don't run off to the stores to buy the sleazy corporate crap in question, then the whole thing comes unglued. At this point, they're desperate. And what this shows us is that magic is powerful, but it's not omnipotent. And in particular, if you realize that magic is being used against you, you recognize what the magic is, and you limit your exposure to it and do the opposite, go against it, make your own choices, then magic fails and you succeed.
Do you think that at the earliest onset of the television and programming, that the ones behind and in charge of some of this programming knew that this was a form of magic and the power that it could have on people?
Do you happen to know where the first regular scheduled television broadcast took place?
Where's that?
Who did it? Nazi Germany before the Second World War.
I'm not surprised on that one.
You bet they knew. They knew exactly what they were doing. Yeah. And just as so many other features of the Nazi state were picked up by the victorious powers of the West and then put in place, advertising was one of them. This sort of saturation propaganda that Hitler's regime tested out on Germany. As soon as the war was over, we saw it in America with the television leading the way. It was, it's like one of the tricks that the Nazis used. One of the reasons they maintained their popularity. Did you know that when they took power, one of the first things they did was give 2 weeks of vacation to every German worker?
Wow.
Yeah, that's why that got picked up here right after the Second World War. All of a sudden, there was vacation pay. Because what happened was that a lot of people in the U.S. ruling elite looked at the Nazi situation and said, if we don't do something like this, somebody's going to do the same thing to us that Hitler did to the German elites. And we don't want that. So a lot of the features of modern American life were in fact copied from Nazi Germany. And certainly saturation television and the propaganda of consume, that was part of it.
Yeah.
Right now you turn on television, you see the puppet on a stick currently in the White House, and it's all the similarities to the whole Nazi. You got the flags in the background, you've got all the cameras focused on him. It's exactly like a scene from Triumph of the Will. All those visual gimmicks, which you did not see before then. You did not see that in American public life. It's all out of that, and that's why people go through the motions of pretending that Joe Biden actually is like running the country. And
yeah, you're absolutely right. No, and I can see it in my personal life every day. People that I knew my whole life, it's like they're under some kind of spell. It's like they've been brainwashed. They can't see what's going on. You can explain it. You can break it down a 1,000 different ways. What's really happening? It doesn't matter. They're just, they're gone.
Exactly. Drool puddling in their laps.
Yeah.
And it's become more intense, and for psychological reasons, as the gap between what's supposed to happen, what actually happens, as that gap has widened, the trance becomes deeper. There's a thing called cognitive dissonance, which is well worth looking up. If I'm sure you're familiar with it, but our listeners may not be. Cognitive dissonance is what happens when you believe that one thing is true, but experience is telling you that a different thing is true. If you can't let yourself give up your belief, if you're emotionally invested in that belief, you go into cognitive dissonance, where you have to pretend that the world is A when it's actually B. And the bigger the gap becomes, the more frantic you become trying to insist that it's A. One of the ways you can tell someone's in cognitive dissonance is that they preach. They're constantly pushing people around them. You've got to believe X. You've got to do X. Because if they convince other people, that helps them keep convincing themselves. And there's a lot of other things, but cognitive dissonance, because people who are deep in cognitive dissonance, you get that trance-like effect. You get that 1,000-mile stare.
Yeah.
You get that, inability to process even very simple arguments. It's just kind of, and then they repeat the same soundbite because that's their defense against realizing that everything they think they know about the world is wrong, and that they're going to have to wake up, shake themselves awake, and enter a harsh new world. And so there's a lot of that these days. There's a huge amount of cognitive dissonance in today's America because the America that's presented by the media, that's presented by advertising, that's presented by the propaganda of our society, and the America that we actually live in are two completely different countries.
Yep. And on the same token, I do see a lot of people waking up and breaking free from this spell at the same time. So it's kind of like, you have both sides of it, people still staying asleep and maybe even going deeper into their sleep, and some people waking up from this spell that they've been under.
And that's typically what happens as cognitive dissonance becomes more extreme, because it's harder, it takes more and more effort, more and more emotional investment in the false belief to cling to that. And so typically people get to the point they can't do it anymore, and they go through the traumatic experience of shaking themselves out of that. And this one piece of advice I'd like to offer all of our listeners, okay? If you get someone who comes to you saying, "Crap, I was wrong, you were right," don't be nasty to them. They've just, they've literally just had their world turned upside down. Get them, buy them a beer, and sit down, let them talk through it, and give them a sympathetic ear. They desperately need that. And the more people wake up that way, and the more people are helped to wake up that way, the sooner we can return to a little more general sanity.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Now, do you think that one of the aspects that magic has been kind of shoved under the carpet, and we're not, been hidden from the American consciousness and the world for so long, is that there's a free energy aspect involved that if, the mass populace found out about it, a lot of other industries would be out of business?
I'm really agnostic about that, because every version of free energy that I've ever seen has turned out to be inaccurate or fraudulent. That doesn't mean they all are. So far, I want to see working machine. Now the thing is, there's another way in which that is absolutely right, which is that an enormous amount of the energy that we use outwardly is a complete waste. We can do without it, and put the actual sources of energy we have to more sensible uses. And so there's kind of a symbolic sense in which that's true. As for whether it's true in another sense, as I say, I'm completely agnostic.
Fair enough. Now, when it comes to the practice of, I guess, contact with spirits or even angels or demons, what are your thoughts on this? Are these really like spirits past of people who were living, or is this some kind of energy? What are we actually kind of communicating with and communing with here?
Okay. The first thing I want to say about that is that this is not something you want to do if you're not very experienced. Right. Most of magic has nothing to do with messing around with spirits, and it can be very dangerous. So this is, do not try this at home unless you've got plenty of knowledge and plenty of experience. I just want to say that first. Now, what actually are these things that people contact in rituals of evocation? The only really honest answer is we have no way of knowing. Philosophers have been telling us for a long time we really have no way of knowing much of anything. What we experience with our senses may not be what's actually there. With regard to disembodied beings, well, something answers. And sometimes what answers certainly seems to be, the soul of a human being who used to live in a physical body. And sometimes what answers seems to be some kind of being that is wiser and morally better than human beings, something that we might consider to be like an angel. Right. And there are such beings who are malevolent, who are destructive, who are tricky, who are predatory. So whatever they are, we don't actually. I mean, you can't exactly apply like litmus paper to these things and find out. That's one of the challenges when you're dealing with the non-physical. But one of the things that we know for sure is there are many different varieties of these things. They can be contacted. It's not a good idea to do it unless you have plenty of experience, but they can be contacted. And they cover a very wide range of types. There are some that seem to be much less intelligent than human beings, some that seem to be equally intelligent, some that are apparently much more intelligent than we are. There are some, as I mentioned, that are better, and some that are morally much worse. And so it's a very complicated issue, and it's one that needs careful, systematic, and competently done work to try to sort things out. One of the things we know for sure is that people who just pick up a Ouija board or something like that are likely to land in trouble, because there are, again, spirits out there, whatever they are, that will lie themselves blue in the face. There are things out there that do not have your best interests in mind at all, and you don't necessarily want to deal with them.
Right.
So it's a complex issue.
What would you say some of the most common reasons that practitioners would contact a spirit or want to get involved in that?
Okay. Well, there are good reasons and there are bad reasons. Okay. I'm going to talk about the bad reasons first, because there's a subculture within the sort of pop occult scene that has been getting into that over the last couple of decades, and it's one of those permanently bad ideas that people get into. To actually do magic yourself, to actually work with the subtle energies, transform your consciousness, transform the consciousnesses of other people, that is a lot of work. It requires hard, disciplined, focused work for years. The reason that people summon demons is they think that's the easy way. They think, I don't need to do this myself. I can just command this spirit and make it do what I want to. It doesn't usually work that way, but the demon's perfectly happy to tell you anything you want to hear. And so you get people who they want, human beings are human beings, right? They want money. They want to get rich. They want, right. They want to make lots of people of their preferred gender sexually available to them. They want power. They want influence. They want something with tentacles to rise up and devour the vice principal of their high school or something. I've seriously, early on in my career as a writer, I would, back when my address was fairly readily available, and this is before the internet, mind you, so it was not just people were writing letters rather than writing emails. I would get letters from these people who were obviously like 15 years old, who wanted me to give them a spell so that they could summon Cthulhu from the deeps to devour their their high school vice principal.
Wow.
And I was going, come on. It's funny in a certain way. And that same mentality, of course, expresses itself in various other ways. So that's the bad reason for contacting spirits.
Right.
Okay. Contacting dead human beings is rarely, if ever, a good idea. There are times it's necessary when a human soul has gotten stuck between lives in as what we call a ghost. It can be necessary to communicate with them in order to set them free, to basically cut them loose so they can go on to the rest of the afterlife and no longer be stuck where they are. There are times when ghosts will deliberately seek out people to communicate to. If there's something that they left undone in their lives, if there's the last will is still locked in a desk drawer somewhere, and the ghost is saying, "Look in the drawer, look in the drawer," the people, and it needs to find somebody who will hear it. So you have these various things, various points of connection. I don't recommend the sort of mediumistic spiritualism type stuff where people are just hanging out with dead folks all the time. We don't know if it's actually the dead people. It might be almost anything. And it doesn't seem to do anyone any good. But now, in terms of angels, working with angels is something that the angel magic is something that a lot of people do in certain schools of magical practice. And it can be very effective and very positive. But the thing you have to remember about angels is that they're smarter than you are, and you can't tell them what to do. Seriously, you don't rank. You don't have the rating to tell an angel what to do, but you can cooperate with the angel and receive certain energies from the angel if the angel wants something to happen. And so there are ways to participate in that flow of power that can be very advantageous. The divine powers that run the cosmos want human beings to be wiser and better. If you want to attain wisdom, you can invoke angels, and the angels are very interested in helping you become more wise. It may hurt, but they'll help you.
Now, I want you to address something that's I found very interesting that's happening recently. It's the whole contact with aliens phenomenon. When I started this show, I had a completely different perspective of aliens and extraterrestrials and what's going on there than I do now. I completely believe it's more of a spiritual thing. It could be something, spiritual that we're contacting. I've had my own contact experience, and it took that to kind of get my wheels turning on what the hell did just happen. And I'm pretty sure little green men aren't coming across the galaxy to visit us on their tin cans. So there's something else apparently going on where people are making contact with.
And it has been going on since the beginning of recorded history. This is the thing that makes the whole UFO phenomenon so amazing. And here I want to recommend two writers from the what was called the new wave of ufology back in the 1970s, Jacques Vallée and John Keel.
Yeah,
I love The Mothman Prophecies, when I was a teenager, was one of my favorite books in the world. I adored that book. What Vallée and Keel pointed out was that the same things that are now being credited to little green men from Zeta Reticuli, or little gray men from Zeta Reticuli, 500 years ago were being blamed on elves and spirits.
Yes.
And if you go to every part of the world, you find stories about little people who can mess with your mind, who will communicate with you, maybe, who may abduct you. These things. This is a normal part of existence on this world. We share this world with other intelligences. Something that mages have, practitioners of magic have been saying all along, and the traditional cultures have said all along. There are these things which are not quite physical as we know physical matter, that interact with us. And it's really funny to watch the transformation where, up until 1947, these things took various other forms, and then as science fiction became more popular, and then you had the first big UFO flap in 1947, and you had a lot of occultists, you had a lot of people who were deeply involved in occult practices, who were also very heavily involved in the early UFO scene.
Yeah.
George Adamski is a great example. He was one of the early contactees. He published hugely influential books about UFOs and so on. Before then, he ran an organization called the Royal Order of Tibet, which was an occult school teaching magic in Los Angeles, California. I've seen some of their correspondence courses. It's kind of interesting stuff. But yeah, he was deeply involved in it. George Van Tassel was deeply involved with it. George Hunt Williamson, another major. All of these people who were really influential in the early period of the UFO scene, they came to it out of the occult scene. And so one of the things, I actually have a book on the subject, which, if you're interested, I'll see if I can shake a copy loose from my publisher, called the UFO Chronicles, which is talking about the role. The UFO story is complicated. There are lots of different games being played there, and I think we can have an interesting conversation. Yeah. But one of the things that was going on there is that a lot of people in the occult scene wanted to create the idea that we were being watched from outer space because they were terrified of the risk of nuclear war.
Ah, man,
and
that makes sense.
All of the early saucer contactees, all of the aliens were saying, we're very concerned about your planets building these nuclear weapons. You remember all that stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Plan 9 from Outer Space. The stupidest movie ever made. Okay, watch it. If you have not watched it, you are missing a treat. There are drinking games, but we don't have to go into that. But Plan 9 from Outer Space, that's one of its basic themes. All The Day the Earth Stood Still. Yeah. All this whole idea was to make people go, hold it. What if we're being watched by Martians and they realize what a bunch of idiots we're being?
Yeah.
So, but that was one of the things that was going on. Yeah, but the thing is, more generally, yeah, if you take contactee accounts, you take abductee accounts, you take those and you compare them to shamanic experiences, to experiences from the Middle Ages of people having encounters with elves and things like that, and it's obviously the same experience. So yeah, these are spiritual entities. They are not little green men or little gray men from Zeta Reticuli.
Right.
They are non-physical beings with whom human beings have interacted since the dawn of time.
And it's funny how everyone's experience is completely different, may have a few similarities here and there. And what we see in the sky has changed throughout the years. It used to be like airships or saucers. Now they're little plasma balls and just more advanced type of things. Yeah, it changes with our consciousness, it seems.
Partially it changes with our consciousness, but there's another factor here, and this actually ties into magic in a certain way, because if you track what's going on, say start from 1947, where these little silver dots were seen and photographed in the sky. Then you get a little later into the early 1950s, where these points of light are buzzing around at certain times in certain places, and this happens. By the 1980s, all of a sudden it's black triangles. And so on. What you find is if you look at what experimental secret craft the U.S. Air Force was testing at that time, gosh, in 1947, high altitude balloons, which look like silver dots from a distance. In the 1950s, U-2 and SR-71 spy plane flights and the earliest generation of spy satellites. Black triangles. What were we testing in the 1980s that looked like a black triangle? I wonder what. It's called stealth.
Yeah.
All the way through. One of the other things that has been going on with the whole UFO thing is that the U.S. Air Force has been using it as camouflage for its secret airplane activities. And we're not talking like the sort of exotic nonsense that the UFO scene likes talking about. We're not talking, captured flying saucers.
So we haven't reverse engineered the little green man ship?
No, it would be nice if we had, but unfortunately, there don't seem to have been any little green ships. But they, starting with the Roswell crash, which they announced, it's weather balloons. And no, it's alien things. We don't want the Russians to know that we're testing high altitude balloon technology that we can literally fly across the Soviet Union from end to end, which we did, by the way. Before we had good spy planes, that's how we took pictures of their installations. And and so there was this whole business with the Air Force feeding the UFO frenzy and shaping the UFO frenzy. How many big UFO revelations came from supposedly, these renegade groups of Air Force officers who were letting the truth out? I bet they sat around laughing themselves sick, watching how readily people believe that. When a government employee tells you, here's the real truth that I'm letting out, he's lying, okay? Just assume, as a matter of course, he's lying, he is gaming you. What he hands you has been cleared by his higher officers because it's what they want you to believe.
Yeah. Well, when it comes to the whole, I guess, kind of narrative of ET human contact, one of the big things lately is that we were genetically engineered by aliens. That's how we had this huge advancement in human thought and technology. And, they've been advancing us throughout the years. Now, I do find it interesting how we have had these, jumps in advancement in technology and human ingenuity and all these things that have happened from ancient times to today, where it seems like all of a sudden we just have all these new technologies and we're able to do these fantastic things. I want to get your thoughts on, do you think this could be a spiritual phenomenon where we could be making kind of contact with something else to get this information on how to do this?
Well, there are a couple of factors involved. The first thing is that the modern version of human history is frankly a crock. The idea is that human beings sat around in caves doing almost nothing for about 2 million years?
Yeah.
And then 5,000 years ago, we suddenly shook ourselves and said, wow, what are we thinking? And created civilization. And went in 5,000 years from mud huts to the moon without doing anything else before then for that whole 2 million. Now, the tradition in the occult schools is that that's not true, that there have been multiple major civilizations before ours, that ours is not. Ours is actually the fifth civilization to reach this level of advancement and then destroy itself. And that what was going on during those 2 million years was civilizations would rise. They would develop their own advanced technologies, which is not the same as ours. Everyone has its own. And then run themselves into crisis and one way or another collapse. And then you'd have this long period of chaos and confusion and violence and difficulty, and out of which, after thousands of years, new civilizations would begin to arise. So on the one hand, it wasn't just that we were sitting around doing nothing for 2 million years until some aliens or spirits came, and
right.
It's that what happened about 5,000 years ago is that we finally finished clearing away the wreckage from the collapse of the last major global civilization. And since then, we've been kind of picking up the pieces and rebuilding. And it's entirely possible that scraps of knowledge had survived from some of these older civilizations, and that was one of the things that helped drive the sudden bursts of ingenuity. Also, the thing is, human beings are very clever. If they have access to resources, they'll do remarkable things with them. We still don't know how some of these things were made, some of these things in the ancient world.
Yeah.
Talk to a contractor if you know one, and you say, okay, here are your specifications for the Great Pyramid. Can you build it?
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And yet the Egyptians did. So the thing is, human beings are very clever. Were there possible contacts with spiritual beings? Were there many? I don't know. It's entirely possible. But I think also a lot of it was simply a matter of picking up the pieces from the last cycle of civilization and going, okay, let's try that again.
Yeah. Man, I love it. Such a great realistic look at some of this stuff. We're definitely going to have you back on to talk about this. And yeah, definitely love to get that book and discuss more about that, because that's fascinating.
I will talk to my publisher and see if I can get you a copy of the UFO Chronicles. It's selling quite well, so I think it should be fairly easy to do that.
That's great. Well, thank you so much again, John, for coming on. Fantastic information as usual. And for those that would like to find out more about your books, the best way is Amazon and your website. What was your website again?
The site is ecosophia.net, ECOSOPHIA.net. I also have a store on bookshop.org. That if you go to bookshop.org and enter my name, you will find my bookstore.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, John. We'll definitely be talking to you again in the future. Yeah.
I look forward to it.
Awesome. Until next time, everyone, have an excellent evening, and we will talk with you again tomorrow.